Ranch owner hears her black, adopted son screaming. What she uncovers ends decades of silence. "I told you not to let that foster boy touch the horses." The voice sliced through the quiet Montana afternoon, like a whip cracking across bare skin. Heads turned. Conversations halted. A few stable hands froze, unsure whether to step in or step back. At the far end of the corral, 11-year-old Ethan stood stiffly beside the black Mustang he'd been brushing, his small hand still resting gently on the animal's flank. His knuckles were scraped, his clothes dusty, but it was the shame on his face that stung the most. The man shouting was Troy Bennett, the longtime ranch manager at Willow Creek Ranch. His voice boomed across the open field, and his next words hit harder than the first. "That kid doesn't belong here. He's not one of us." Ethan blinked fast, his shoulders folding inward as if trying to disappear into himself. But just as the moment reached peak humiliation, another voice, quieter but laced with steel, rose behind them. "Say that again." The crowd shifted. Whispers rustled like dry leaves. Standing at the top of the paddock steps was Rebecca Miller, new owner of the ranch, inheritor of her late brother's estate, and more importantly, Ethan's guardian. She wasn't yelling. She didn't have to. She descended the steps one by one, her boots crunching in the gravel, her eyes never leaving Troy. "Did I just hear you say my nephew doesn't belong on this ranch?" she asked. Troy opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated. Rebecca kept walking. "Because if that's what you said, I suggest you pack your things." The air went dead still. The black Mustang beside Ethan let out a snort, almost as if it understood. And for the first time that summer, Ethan's eyes met Rebecca's, not with fear, but the first glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safety, maybe even home. Willow Creek Ranch wasn't the kind of place most people stumbled upon. It was tucked deep in the rolling hills of Montana, surrounded by miles of open pasture, ancient pine trees, and weather-worn fences that looked like they'd been standing since before the state had a name. For generations, it had been known as a sanctuary for thoroughbred horses and high-dollar competitions, but in recent years, it had become more than just a ranch. At least, that's what Rebecca Miller had in mind when she inherited it. The place had belonged to her brother, Daniel, a veteran, a cowboy, and, unexpectedly, in the final stretch of his life, a father. When Daniel passed, he left Rebecca with two things: legal ownership of the ranch and guardianship of Ethan, the foster boy he had planned to adopt but didn't live long enough to sign the final papers. Rebecca, who lived most of her adult life in Seattle, working in nonprofit youth programs, had never expected to come back to Montana. She wasn't a rancher. She didn't know the difference between a saddle cinch and a halter. But when she met Ethan for the first time, standing silent and small at the corner of Daniel's funeral, she knew there was no going back to city life. Ethan didn't say much that day. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his sneakers too small, his eyes fixed on the ground. But when Rebecca asked if he liked horses, he whispered, "I like the quiet they make when no one's yelling." That was enough. Rebecca made the move in less than a month, trading her skyline apartment for the scent of hay and leather, the sound of creaking barn doors, and the overwhelming responsibility of managing a property she barely understood. What she did understand, however, was pain. And what she recognized in Ethan was a boy who had spent too long trying not to take up space. The first weeks were hard. Ethan didn't speak much. He flinched at loud sounds. He avoided eye contact. And the staff, mostly hired by Daniel before his death, were used to a certain way of doing things, namely, ignoring anything that didn't look like purebred or profit. Troy Bennett had been foreman for over 20 years. He didn't like change, didn't like being questioned, and most of all, didn't like the idea of some non-ranch kid walking around where stallions were worth more than trucks. Rebecca had hoped time and kindness would soften things. She was wrong. The tension had been building for weeks. What happened today in front of the Mustang? That wasn't a slip. It was the crack in a dam that had been threatening to burst since the day she and Ethan arrived. And now, something had to give. That night, after the barn lights had been dimmed and the ranch had quieted to the low hum of cicadas and creaking wooden beams, Rebecca sat alone in the study. She held a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the ledger of ranch operations laid out in front of her, but not seeing a single number. Her mind kept circling back to Ethan's face. That look of humiliation, of being reduced to something less than human in a place that was supposed to be his sanctuary. She had hoped things would settle on their own, that people like Troy would eventually come around. But watching Ethan flinch in front of the Mustang, watching the boy shrink under the weight of someone else's hatred, had snapped something inside her. She wasn't going to wait for hearts to change. She would change the environment. The first thing she did the next morning was call Marcus, her attorney and longtime friend from Seattle. She gave him a single instruction. I want access to all ranch personnel files, complaints, evaluations, everything, quietly. Marcus, always efficient, didn't ask questions. I'll start digging, he said. Rebecca hung up and headed out to the stables. She found Ethan sitting in the corner of the hayloft, cross-legged, his hoodie pulled up over his head even though it was warm outside. In his lap was a tattered sketchpad he always carried, but rarely showed. She sat down beside him without speaking for a moment. You like it up here? She finally asked. He nodded slowly. It's quiet. No one bothers the loft. She looked over at the drawing on the page. A horse. Detailed, bold, in full gallop. That's beautiful, she said, and meant it. Ethan shrugged. Just something I do when I can't sleep. She hesitated, then added, About yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. Ethan didn't respond, but after a moment he said I wasn't allowed to touch the horses, that I wasn't part of the ranch. Rebecca's jaw tightened. Well, that's going to change. Because you are part of this ranch. You're part of this family. And no one gets to decide that but us. For the first time, Ethan looked up and met her eyes directly. His own were glassy, but not from fear. Are you gonna fire him? Rebecca didn't flinch. Yes. That single word seemed to land in the air like a stone tossed into a still pond. Ethan looked back down at his sketchpad, his fingers tightening slightly around the pencil. Can I draw the horses again? He asked. She smiled softly. You can draw them, brush them, ride them. They're yours as much as they are mine. Later that day, Rebecca called a meeting with the core ranch staff. She stood in front of the stable office, clipboard in hand, voice clear and unwavering. Troy Bennett is no longer with Willow Creek Ranch, she announced. Effective immediately. The room murmured, a few shocked looks, one or two knowing glances, but no one challenged her. This ranch isn't just about horses, she continued. It's about healing, and if you can't support that, this isn't the place for you. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't need it. She turned and walked back into the sunlight, where Ethan stood quietly by the gate, watching. She gave him a nod, and in that moment, something between them solidified, an unspoken promise. This ranch was changing, starting now. In the days that followed Troy's departure, the air around Willow Creek Ranch shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no mass rebellion, no fiery confrontation, but something subtle and necessary had begun. The silence no longer felt tense. The glances between staff didn't carry the same undercurrent of judgment. Still, Rebecca knew that change wouldn't sustain itself on symbolism alone. Action was required. She started by reviewing every employee file personally, flagging those with repeated complaints of disrespect or misconduct, especially toward the children brought in through the seasonal foster program. To her dismay, there were more than she expected. A trainer who consistently reassigned less desirable chores to the foster kids, a stable hand who joked about government charity cases under his breath. A cook who accidentally forgot to pack lunch for them more than once. None of these offenses were criminal, but Rebecca wasn't looking for legal lines. She was drawing moral ones. 3 more staff members were let go by the end of the week. Each received a professional severance, but no ceremony, no goodbyes. Rebecca didn't make speeches. She just walked the path she believed in and made space for those willing to do the same. Meanwhile, Ethan began to change too. He still didn't talk much, but his posture shifted. He stood a little taller. He lingered longer near the horses. One afternoon, Rebecca found him gently braiding the mane of the black Mustang, now renamed Shadow, humming under his breath. She didn't interrupt. She only watched, silently grateful. But not everyone outside the ranch approved of the changes. A few days later, a local podcast episode surfaced online, hosted by a sharp-tongued woman known for stirring controversy. The title read, "Woke Ownership Ruins Historic Montana Ranch." In the episode, the host ranted, "What kind of message does it send when a woman with zero ranching background shows up and turns a horse operation into a therapy center for troubled kids? I'll tell you, it's performative parenting. And let's talk about this so-called nephew she took in. Does anyone even know who that boy is? Sounds more like a PR move than a family." The clip didn't go viral, but it did find its way into the inboxes of several longtime donors and board members affiliated with the Ranch Foundation. Marcus called Rebecca immediately. "We can issue a cease and desist," he said, "or have PR draft a response." But Rebecca was quiet on the other end. Then she said calmly, "No legal letters, no counterattacks. We'll respond in our own way." But that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Rebecca sat at the dining table with her laptop open. She pulled up a folder labeled Summer Memories and opened a recent video clip. Ethan brushing Shadow in slow, careful strokes while whispering something soft that couldn't be heard over the wind. She smiled, then clicked Upload. The caption read, "This is what belonging looks like." She didn't tag anyone, didn't name names. She simply posted it on the Willow Creek Foundation's official page. Within 24 hours, the video had over 400,000 views. Comments poured in. One woman wrote, "As a former foster kid who never found a home like this, thank you." Another read, "My son's been in therapy for years. I've never seen him as peaceful as he was after a day on your ranch." Rebecca didn't read them all. She didn't need to. Because just as the podcast had tried to define her narrative, she had offered something stronger in return. Not defense, not outrage, just truth. And in that truth, people could decide for themselves what kind of legacy Willow Creek Ranch was becoming. The next morning, Rebecca stepped out onto the porch with a steaming cup of coffee and paused. The sky stretched wide and blue above the hills, but her eyes went straight to the barn. Ethan was already up, sitting cross-legged near the fence with his sketch pad balanced on his knees. His hoodie was pulled halfway over his head, not out of habit anymore, but for comfort. Shadow stood beside him, close enough that the boy's shoulder almost brushed the horse's flank. Rebecca smiled softly, but as she turned to head inside, a thought tugged at her. Something still lingered. A shadow, not in the sky, but in Ethan's posture. That afternoon, while tidying up Ethan's room, Rebecca noticed something odd. One of the drawers in his bedside table was stuck. She pulled gently, then harder, until it gave way with a soft pop. Inside, beneath a few folded socks, was a crumpled piece of lined paper, creased so many times it looked like it had been hidden for weeks. The handwriting was uneven, scrawled in purple marker. She sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded it. It was a list. The title at the top read, "Things I Must Notta Do." 1. Talk too much. 2. Ask questions. 3. Touch the horses. 4. Cry where people can see. 5. Call her mom. 6. Ask to stay. And at the bottom, in smaller writing, if I break these, they'll send me back. Rebecca stared at the paper, her throat tightening. This wasn't just trauma. It was programming. Rules carved into a child by rejection and fear. She didn't hear Ethan come in until he was already in the doorway, staring at the paper in her hands. His face fell. "You weren't supposed to find that," he whispered. She stood slowly, placing the list gently on the bed. "Ethan, who made you believe this?" He shrugged, eyes locked on the floor. "One of the homes. They said if I messed up, I'd be gone. That no one keeps kids who take up space." Rebecca knelt in front of him. "Listen to me. That list isn't true. Not one word of it. And it doesn't live in this house anymore." He didn't speak. She reached for his hand. "You don't have to be quiet to be safe. You don't have to hide what hurts. And you can call me whatever feels right to you. I'm not leaving." His lip trembled. "What if I mess up? Then we figure it out together," she said. "That's what family does." He hesitated, then leaned forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face into her stomach. She held him, steady and sure, one hand rubbing gentle circles between his shoulder blades. That night, while he slept curled up against his lion plushie, Rebecca took the list and walked outside. She lit the corner with a match and let the flame curl across the page until it vanished in a soft stream of ash. She watched it disappear into the night wind. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a quiet promise that from now on, Ethan wouldn't have to write rules to stay small. In this home, he was allowed to take up space. By the end of the week, something subtle had shifted in Ethan. He wasn't suddenly outgoing or loud, but the way he moved told a different story. He lingered in shared spaces longer. He offered to help the new stable hand wash down saddles without being asked. And when Rebecca caught him humming while organizing brushes, she didn't say a word, just listened, quietly grateful. But one afternoon, as they sat on the back porch sipping lemonade, Ethan turned to her with a question that caught her off guard. "Can people really change?" Rebecca looked up from her drink, surprised by the weight of his voice. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Like, not just pretend to be nice for a while. Actually change who they are." She set her glass down. "Yeah, I think people can change. But not because someone tells them to, because they decide they want to be better. For real." He thought about that, then said softly, "Do you think I've changed?" Rebecca turned fully to him. "I think you've always been you. Brave, kind, smart. I think maybe now you're just letting yourself show it more." He blinked slowly, then nodded. "And you?" She smiled. "Oh, I've definitely changed. I used to be scared of horses. And kids." Ethan grinned. "Now look at you, living on a ranch with both." "Guess you make it worth it," she said. He didn't answer, but he leaned his shoulder gently against her arm. They sat that way for a while, watching the wind ripple across the fields. From the barn came the soft sound of horses shifting, the creak of wood, the call of a bluebird from the roof. The quiet no longer felt like a gap. It felt full. It felt like something healing. Rebecca didn't need to push the moment further. Some things didn't need explanation. Some questions, once asked, had already done their job, just by being spoken aloud. A week later, the ranch buzzed with new energy as the annual Fall Harvest Festival approached, a local tradition where neighboring families, foster kids, and nearby schools came together for games, food, and a horse showcase. It was usually a modest event, but this year, Rebecca had something bigger in mind. She wanted the community to see what Willow Creek had become, not just a place for horses, but a place where healing lived. She approached Ethan about participating in the horse showcase. At first, he stared at her like she'd spoken in another language. "You want me to ride?" he asked slowly. "In front of people?" "Only if you want to," she said. "But I think Shadow's been waiting for his big moment. And I think you have, too." He didn't answer right away. That night, she found him in the barn brushing Shadow, whispering to him softly, the way he always did when he thought no one was listening. The next morning, he gave a quiet nod. "Okay, I'll do it." They practiced every day. Rebecca watched as Ethan slowly became one with the horse, his posture straighter, his hands more confident, his eyes focused. The staff watched too, most of them quietly impressed, some even asking if he'd ever had formal lessons. He hadn't. He was just that connected. On the day of the festival, the ranch was transformed. White tents lined the main pasture. Hay bales doubled as benches. The scent of apple cider and fresh cornbread drifted through the air. Children ran with painted faces, chasing each other through the grass. Rebecca stood near the corral, clipboard in hand, but her eyes stayed on Ethan. When his name was announced, the crowd quieted. He rode out on Shadow, posture tall, back straight, the reins loose but sure. He didn't perform tricks. He didn't need to. He and the horse moved like they were made from the same breath. At one point, a young boy near the front whispered, "He looks like a real cowboy." Rebecca smiled. She couldn't have said it better. After the ride, Ethan slid off Shadow and was met with a round of applause. Someone asked Rebecca, "Is that your son?" She looked at Ethan, dust on his boots, hair stuck to his forehead, face lit up with something rare and real, and replied, "Yes, in every way that matters." Ethan heard her, and for the first time, he smiled without hesitation. Later that evening, after the festival tents had been packed away and the last of the hay bales were stacked near the barn, the ranch finally quieted. The golden light of sunset stretched across the fields, and a soft breeze stirred the trees. Ethan sat on the porch steps, still wearing his dusty boots, holding the blue participation ribbon in one hand and a cup of warm cider in the other. Rebecca joined him, her hair pulled back, a shawl draped over her shoulders. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat beside him, letting the silence settle like an old friend. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Do you think they liked it?" She looked at him. "They didn't just like it. They saw you. Really saw you." He nodded slowly, tracing the rim of his cup with his finger. "I felt it," he admitted. "When I was riding. It was like I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just me." "Exactly," Rebecca said. "That's the version of you I wish the whole world could meet." He glanced sideways. "Even the ones who say I don't belong?" She turned to him fully. "Especially them. Because the more they see, the harder it is for them to hold on to what's broken in their hearts." Ethan went quiet again. Then he asked, "What if someday we helped another kid, one like me, who's scared to be loud, or touch horses, or ask to stay?" Rebecca's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. But the way he said it, calm, steady, almost hopeful, made something bloom in her chest. "You'd want to share this?" she asked softly. "Maybe not right away," he said. "But yeah, I'd want them to know it's possible." She placed a hand on his back. "Then when we're ready, we'll make room." He looked down at the ribbon in his hand, then folded it gently and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I never thought I'd be part of something worth keeping." Rebecca gave him a warm smile. "You're not just part of it, Ethan. You're the reason it exists." They stayed like that for a while, watching the sun dip below the hills, letting the calm settle deep into their bones. And in that moment, without needing to say it aloud, they both understood something simple but profound. Home isn't where you start. It's where someone chooses to stay with you. The next morning, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of pine and ash, left over from the fire pit, where the last of the marshmallows had been roasted the night before. Ethan helped Rebecca gather folding chairs from the pasture, while Shadow wandered freely nearby, sniffing at empty cider cups and patches of clover. As they worked, a delivery truck pulled up near the ranch gate. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. She wasn't expecting anything. A man in a blue cap stepped down and handed her a padded envelope with a state seal in the corner. "From Helena," he said. "Signature required." She signed without thinking, then opened it carefully as Ethan watched from a few feet away. Inside was a typed letter on official stationery. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and then she let out a soft breath. Ethan stepped closer. "Is it bad?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, it's good. Really good." She crouched to meet his eye level. "It's from the Department of Family Services. The adoption is final, Ethan. It's official." For a second, he just blinked. "So, you're really my mom now." Her voice wavered, but she smiled. "I've been your mom since the day you walked through that gate, whether the papers said it or not. But now, the papers agree." Ethan didn't say anything. He just threw his arms around her neck and held on. She felt his breath catch against her shoulder. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was everything. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan looked at the sky and said, "I think the ranch feels different today." "How so?" Rebecca asked. "I think it finally knows who we are." She nodded. "Maybe it's just catching up to us." And together, they walked back toward the barn, mother and son, ready to make the kind of memories that didn't need permission to last. A few days after the adoption papers arrived, Rebecca received an invitation she hadn't expected. It came through Marcus, forwarded from a statewide youth advocacy summit held annually in Helena. The letter asked if she would consider speaking about Willow Creek's foster outreach program and, more specifically, her personal experience as a new adoptive parent. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her favorite arena, especially not when the topic involved digging into vulnerable places. But then she thought of Ethan, of the list he had hidden in his drawer, of the kids still writing lists like that in their minds, believing they have to be quiet to be safe. She said yes. When she told Ethan, his reaction was quiet but serious. "Will you tell them everything?" he asked. Rebecca paused. "As much as I can. Even about the rules I used to think were real? Especially those." The event was held in a small conference center just off the state capitol building. Rebecca wore jeans and boots, not a blazer. She didn't want to look like a professional. She wanted to look like a mom who'd shown up. The room was filled with social workers, teachers, case managers, people who had seen things, heard things, and carried stories no one else understood. When she took the stage, Rebecca didn't speak from notes. She didn't quote statistics. She talked about the first time she saw Ethan draw a horse with his head down, afraid to make noise. She talked about the ranch manager who told him he didn't belong, and the way Ethan had once believed it. And then she talked about the ride at the Harvest Festival, about the boy who once wouldn't speak above a whisper, now gliding across a field on the back of a Mustang, under the open sky, with every eye watching, and none of it breaking him. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then more. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. Afterward, a man approached her with a soft voice and a business card. "We're launching a state program to help foster placements in rural areas," he said. "We could really use someone like you to help shape it." Rebecca glanced down at the card, then looked toward the exit doors, where Ethan stood waiting, swinging his backpack and grinning at her like she'd just won a race. "You already have someone like me," she said, "and he's only just getting started." That night, as they drove home from the summit, the highway stretched out before them like a quiet ribbon of light through the darkness. Ethan leaned against the window, watching the stars blur past. "Were you nervous?" he asked without turning. Rebecca glanced over, smiling. Terrified, she admitted. But then I remembered who I was speaking for. He looked at her then, eyes reflecting the dash lights. For me, for you, and for every kid still waiting to be seen. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm glad you told them the truth. Me too, she said. Truth has a way of finding people when they need it most. They pulled into the ranch just past 10. The porch light glowed softly, and shadow nickered in the distance from the barn. Before heading inside, Ethan paused at the edge of the gravel driveway and looked out toward the pasture. It's funny, he said, how big everything used to feel. Now it feels like it fits. Rebecca stepped beside him. Because you've grown into it. Or maybe it grew around me, he whispered. She nodded, her voice quiet. Maybe both. Inside, Ethan went to his room while Rebecca hung up her jacket. On the kitchen table sat a note he had written before they left that morning. She hadn't noticed it before. It read, Home isn't where you come from. It's where someone waits for you to get back. Her chest tightened. She folded the note gently and slipped it into the family photo album, right beside the picture of Ethan riding Shadow, sunlight in his hair, eyes forward. That night, as the wind curled through the trees and the ranch fell into stillness, something deep and steady settled in her heart. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something. Something permanent. Something true. And for the first time in a long time, Rebecca didn't feel like she was filling someone else's shoes. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The following week, the trees around Willow Creek began to turn. Amber, rust, and deep gold, brushing every branch like someone had painted the world warmer. Autumn always came early in Montana, but this year, it felt different. Maybe because the house finally echoed with more than just footsteps and chores. Now, it echoed with music, with laughter, and sometimes even with the sound of Ethan humming as he did homework at the kitchen table. One crisp Saturday morning, Rebecca and Ethan sat on the porch with mugs of hot cocoa, both wrapped in thick blankets. Ethan was unusually quiet, but it wasn't the withdrawn kind of silence she had once feared. It was the thoughtful kind. After a while, he said, Do you think we'll always live here? Rebecca turned to him. I don't know, she said honestly. Life has a funny way of shifting when we least expect it. But if we ever move, it'll be together. And wherever we go, we bring this with us. She tapped her chest gently. Home lives here now. Ethan nodded, staring out at the barn where Shadow was stretching in the morning sun. I was thinking, maybe next year we could invite other kids to stay longer. Not just a summer thing, like real visits, sleepovers, even weekends. Rebecca blinked. You mean like starting a program? Not a program, Ethan said. Just a place, for kids who are still scared to talk. He didn't say it with pity. He said it like someone who remembered what it felt like to not have a voice. Rebecca felt a lump rise in her throat. You know, I think that's one of the best ideas I've heard all year. He smiled, but didn't look at her. I just want someone else to feel what I feel now. And what's that? She asked softly. Ethan paused, thinking. Safe, but also real. Like I belong in the picture, not just standing next to it. That sentence hit harder than anything she'd heard at the summit. Any policy, any speech. It was the truth, pure and unfiltered. And it reminded her why they started this journey in the first place. Then let's make more room, she said. One brave heart at a time. Ethan leaned into her side, and together they watched the light dance across the hills, knowing that sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't built with money or titles. It's built with listening, with staying, and with showing up every single day.